As many of you know, Ashley and I went to Europe last year. It's almost been a year since we went, which just seems crazy because it feels like we were there not too long ago. But when we were in Europe, we spent most of our time in Paris, and Ashley had planned most of our days out really well so that we could just see everything that we wanted to see in the little bit of time that we had there. And on one of the last days that we were there, we went to see the Eiffel Tower. You have to do it at least once. It is truly remarkable. It's just one of those things that's a must when you go to Paris. You have to see the Eiffel Tower. But when we got there was a lot of construction going on. So it wasn't as beautiful as it could have been, and that you see in all the pictures. We didn't quite get to experience it, but it's still really impressive. Another famous monument that we went to see was the Paris Arc de Triomphe. And it's not that far away from the Eiffel Tower, so we walked, which was really great in and of itself, just to kind of walk through more of Paris. And what you got to know about the Arc de Triomphe is it's in the middle of this really large roundabout that's really busy with traffic. So you can't just cross the road to get to the Arc. You have to go through this underground tunnel. Something you should know about my bride is that she's claustrophobic. So not quite halfway through this tunnel, she stopped me, and in the middle of all the people going to see the Ark and coming back out, she stops me and she says, "Je peux pas." I cannot. We learned that while we were there, so. I cannot. I tried to assure her that we were almost there. You could kind of see where the tunnel ended, and that there were so many other people going that it was safe. It was going to be okay. It was safe. But she told me that she knew the first half was safe by experience. Needless to say, we didn't go see the Ark up close. Or get to climb upon the Ark and gaze out on what's supposed to be one of the most beautiful scenes that you could see in all of Paris. And I'm not trying to minimize her fear of tight and underground spaces by any means. All of us grapple with fear in one way or another. But fear may cause us to do all sorts of silly things. And sometimes even cause us to react in a way that may be detrimental to life. Like fear of failure causes many to never try. Fear of rejection causes many not to want to be vulnerable with others. And fear of tight spaces may cause you and your husband to miss out on beauty. Love you. But fear can also be a really great motivator. Right? Many salespeople thrive on fear that someone may outsell them, or athletes use fear to propel them to better gamesmanship and to just become increasingly better at the sport that they play. See, fear can motivate us to excel in something and to even to press further into something, or fear can cause us to shrivel and cower. Fear of the unknown likely has that same kind of outcome at the same time, at times. But as we're going to see in the text before us this morning, the response of fear will either draw us to Christ or propel us further away. Fear will either draw us to Christ or propel us further away. If you haven't already turned there, we're continuing in Luke chapter 8 this morning, beginning in verse 22, and I'll read through verse 39. You're welcome to turn there and join with me. But this morning, I want us to think astutely about the magnificence and wonder of who Jesus is and what he has accomplished and continues to accomplish, about which we've already been singing and spending our time this morning reflecting upon through our corporate worship and our corporate prayers and our corporate singing. But here we are, Luke 8, starting at verse 22. I'm going to read from the NRSV if you're ever concerned about what translation I'm using. And one day he got into a boat with his disciples, and he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side of the lake." So they put out, and while they were sailing, he fell asleep. And a windstorm swept down the lake, and the boat was filling with water, and they were in danger, and they woke him, shouting, Master, Master, we are perishing. And he woke up, rebuked the wind and the raging waves, and they ceased, and all was calm. And he said to them, Where is your faith? They were afraid and amazed, and they said to one another, Who then is this that he commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him? Who is this? Then they arrived at the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee, and he stepped out on land, and a man of the city who had demons met him. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he did not live in a house, but he lived in the tombs. And when he saw Jesus, he fell down before him and shouted at the top of his voice, What do you have to do with me, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. For Jesus had commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man, for many times it had seized him. And he was kept under guard with bonds and chains and shackles, but would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the wilds. Then Jesus asked him, What's your name? And he said, Legion, for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Now there was a hillside with a large herd of swine that were feeding. And the demons begged Jesus to let him enter the swine. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man, entered the swine, and the herd rushed down a steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Then the swineherders saw what had happened, and they ran off into the city and in the country. Then the people came out to see what had happened, and when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen what had taken place, told them that the one who had been possessed by the demons had been healed. Then all the people from the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned to Galilee. Then the man from whom all the demons had gone out begged Jesus that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, Return to your home, and declared how much God has done for you. So he went away proclaiming throughout the city how much Jesus had done for him. There's just so much that is fascinating about this account. And honestly, I had to work particularly hard in my preparation to whittle all of this down into the time that I have allotted. The passage before us this morning really gets at the heart of what St. Luke has been revealing throughout his gospel, throughout this whole writing. With everything that the disciples had witnessed, all the healings and teachings, they finally asked the question, who is this? Who is this? We've spent over a year now in St. Luke's gospel exploring that same question. And even if you believe that you know the answer this morning, all of you are bright, I assume that you have some idea, but even if you believe that you know the answer, sit with the tension that the disciples have. Sit in that tension with them. Let yourself be caught up in the magnificence. What I want to observe more keenly today than just the question about who Jesus is the two distinct responses of fear. That's what I want to observe this morning, the two distinct responses of fear. Two different responses when one encounters who Jesus is. And Luke here narrates two scenes that are connected by the notion of fear in responding to who Jesus is. And the text in verse 22 begins simply enough. Now it happened, one day he got into a boat with his disciples. No particularity of when this happened. That's not important. To Luke, anyway. Just one day, Jesus determined that he was going to go across the lake, and so they went. St. Luke tells us that as they are crossing the lake, Jesus falls asleep. Then, not untypical for that area, a great windstorm develops, causing waves and rain to crash over the sides of the boat so that the boat's filling with water, and now the disciples are in a panic. These guys were professional fishermen, most of them. They know what to do when there are storms on the lake. But this storm scared them. And it seems, by all accounts, they're in a panic, and I don't know how forceful they were in waking up Jesus. But if as the violent storm and the wind and the boat filling with water, all the waves crashing over this small boat, and Jesus is still sleeping, like I imagine they had to be pretty bullish waking him up. Like, I don't know how you can sleep that hard. But there Jesus is, crashed out, and they, Master, how in the world can you sleep right now? Do you not care that we are perishing? The disciples just seem to be in complete, utter panic. The picture of Jesus is quite the opposite. He's just sleeping. And then next, St. Luke merely wrote that Jesus got up and rebuked the wind and raging waves of water, and they ceased. Just that simply. The disciples are in utter panic. And Luke writes, Jesus got up and rebuked the waves and raging water, and they ceased. Love it. The same word, epitomao, used in chapter 4 when Jesus rebuked the demons, it's the same word used when Jesus rebuked the fever of Simon's mother-in-law. And here he rebukes, same word, the wind and the violent waves. And as soon as the words leave his lips, the wind and waves obey him, and there is calm. That's how simply Luke writes about this. Can you imagine that? Like, sit in that with the disciples. Jesus amid this terrifying and unrelenting chaos, rebukes the great chaos and brings great calm. Just stopped. Then Jesus turns to his disciples and says, "Where's your faith?" In St. Luke's Gospel, we've already witnessed the faith of several non-disciples that Jesus praised. These friends of the paralytic, you'll remember when they came, Jesus praised their faith. The centurion in Capernaum, the woman who cleansed Jesus' feet, who cleaned his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair. Jesus praises their great faith. Meanwhile, these guys who have seen the miracles that Jesus has done, they were there when he healed people. They saw the lame man pick up his bed and walk. They witnessed demons obeying him, fever ceasing at his command. But this was different. These were the waters of the deep. And for many ancients, they believed that the waters of the deep were the place of utter chaos. This is the vision that you get right away in Genesis 1. This was the utter chaos, and only God throughout the Old Testament was attributed with authority over the chaos, over the sea, over the waters. He is the one who stills the waters when they rise. He's the one who rebuked the Red Sea and it became dry ground. It seems to me when I read this that it's almost surprising to Jesus that they haven't put this together yet. When he turns and asks them, where's your faith? I can relate to the disciples, so I'm not trying to disparage those guys. I have experienced the power of God so many times in my life. I've witnessed what I can only affirm to be miraculous healings. I've seen incredible works of God that I can only attribute to the hand of God. Now I'll share one with you. A few years ago, Ashley came to me while I was studying one night, and she said she felt a lump in one of her breasts. Her family has a history of breast cancer, and so it's something that we just pay attention to. So she asked me to feel to see if I felt it, and that she wasn't just imagining. But within a moment, my heart sank. As honestly, as plainly as I can feel my hand now, I felt a hard lump. And it wasn't small or hard to find. And over the next couple of days until we could get her in to see her doctor, we continued just to monitor her. I knew precisely where it was, and I swear that I could even see it. It was obvious. And we finally were able to get her an appointment with her doctor. In the morning before we left, I felt once again, just to be sure, so that I could tell the doctor the precise location so that there was no missing. And as her doctor began to examine her, I just prepared myself to receive the worst news I could imagine. Ash and I have been through a lot in life, but nothing like cancer. I was preparing myself as much as I could. The thoughts of needing to drop out of seminary. I was in the middle of my seminary career at the time, not knowing how in the world we were going to afford the treatments. All of this came rushing in on me. All these feelings, all these emotions, all these thoughts, the anxieties, rushing through my mind as I sat in the doctor's office. And then he looked at me and said, "Where is it?" And I thought, this guy can't even feel what's obvious. So I got up from my chair and I proceeded to show him, only I couldn't find it. What was so unmistakable just an hour ago, what I swear I could even see, was not there. Completely gone. And I just couldn't believe it. That there was no mistaking this hard lump in Ashley's breast, but now it was gone. And the doctor had no explanations for us. I can only attribute this to the hand of God. And Ash and I have experienced the faithfulness of God so many times, I can't even count. And even after this, I still have floundering faith. Often shaky at best. The second half of verse 25 says that the disciples were afraid and amazed. And so that there may be a reverent awe in the question that they ask, who is this? They may be in some way like starting to put this together, that this one who has power over sickness and disease, who they've seen even raise somebody from the dead, maybe they're starting to put this thing together, that even the wind and the waves, even the waters of the deep obey him. Who is this? They are astonished and awestruck that the wind and the lake obey his words. Even the forces of nature obeyed him. But don't miss this. Their fear and astonishment caused them to seek him and draw closer to him, to know him. They didn't jump out of the boat and swim away. Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey his commands? That they are still grappling with everything that they've experienced. And the text says that they were afraid and astonished, likely afraid and disturbed from the context. This is wild stuff. Have you ever seen a storm just end like that? I grew up in South Louisiana. There were times where I saw tornadoes touch down and follow the highway down a ways. And if someone would have walked outside and just said, shh, stop, and everything became calm, I'm certain that I would have been afraid and disturbed. The fear is not so much the issue. The issue is, what do you do with the fear? The disciples don't jump out of the boat and swim away. They begin to press in. Who is this? Even in fear, they press forward. They didn't go back to the other side where they knew it was safe. Their fear and astonishment causes them to seek Jesus and to know him all the more. And then, assumedly, they make the rest of their voyage across the lake in calm and peaceful fashion. I don't know if Jesus fell back asleep. Maybe. In verse 26, they arrive in the country of the Gerasenes, opposite of Galilee. This is now Gentile territory. And St. Luke has already mentioned the faith of one Gentile, the centurion, a faith unlike Jesus even witnessed in Jerusalem. But this is the first time in Luke's gospel that Jesus goes into Gentile territory. That may not mean much to you. This is utterly provocative. And it's certainly intentional. Remember, the mission of God's Messiah was to draw Israel back to God, to seek and save the lost of the tribe of Israel. But Luke, already likely writing to a predominantly Gentile audience, Luke is a Gentile, Luke already gives hints of what will later be realized in Acts chapter 10 in the inclusion of the Gentiles into the family of God without needing to become Jews. Luke's already setting us up for the Gentile inclusion. And St. Luke wrote in verse 27 that as Jesus stepped on land, a man of the city who had demons met him. This man apparently had been oppressed by demons, plural, demons, for a long time, and he was naked. And he didn't live in a house, he lived among the dead, likely scaring the defecation out of anyone who encountered him. They were so powerful within him that not even the bonds and chains or shackles could hold him. Like Sebok's strong, but I don't know if he could break chains. And yet when Jesus saw him, this man fell before Jesus and said, "What do you have to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" The question that the disciples asked, who is this? The demons already know. In his epistle, St. James wrote that the demons believe in the one God. They know who he is, and by all accounts, who Jesus is, and they tremble. The demons believe and shudder. These demons know who Jesus is, just like the demons that we've already encountered in chapter 4. And the man falls before Jesus, begging Jesus not to torment him. This is how I view the scene. I assume in the midst of this man naked, screaming and shouting, The disciples wanted to get back in the boat. Like maybe the storm on the lake wasn't such a bad time compared to the storm that's in front of them now. But Jesus just remains calm. Jesus remains calm before the demonic storm as he had before the storm of the wind and violent waves on the lake. In verse 30, Jesus asks the demon for his name. He said, Legion, for many demons had entered him. A legion would have represented a military unit of over 5,000 soldiers. Legion. It may be hyperbolic. I don't know. But whatever the case, here is this man that St. Luke gives no details about who he was before. All we know is that at some point in time, quite a long time before this confrontation, the man had many demons enter him. And then he encounters Jesus. I wish I had the time to discuss the incident with the pigs more. I don't. But I will say that the whole point is that Jesus remains in control of the whole situation. That's the point. That even in this conversation with the demons, Jesus is in control. The demons, as the waters, are subservient to his authority. And he allows them to go into the pigs. And these pigs, though they were most certainly incredibly important to the farmers, their livelihood, and to the town, are seen as mere collateral damage. And I don't say that lightly. I don't think that's funny. And if you would like to speak further about the moral implications, we can talk later. But the oppressed man supersedes the value of the pigs, and Jesus permits the demons to enter them, and they run headlong off the cliff into the lake. And there's all kinds of imagery that's involved in that. You can put an asterisk in your Bible, by the way, if you want. I will likely bring this up when we get to chapters 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. But here's the crux of the narration. Here's the crux. The response of the town people. In both narratives, Jesus' authority and power are on display. That is obvious. That is always a centralizing feature. But what I want us to really pay attention to is how the townspeople respond to the revelation of Jesus' authority. Just listen. Listen to the way that St. Luke tells the story. Verse 34. And when the swineherders saw what had happened, they ran off and told it to the city and in the country. Then the people came out to see what had happened. And when they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out sitting at the feet of Jesus. Sitting at the feet of Jesus in the posture of a disciple. Sitting there. And he's clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Just as the disciples in the boat, when Jesus rebuked the wind and the waves, they were afraid. This is wild. With all certainty, the people of the region must have been terrified by the demoniac. I mean, they tried to shackle the guy. And he would break those shackles. If ever there was a person to be scared of, this guy would be one. But when the people witness the man clothed and in his right mind sitting at the feet of Jesus, St. Luke said they were afraid and filled with great fear. And the object of their fear is the one who is even greater than the host of demons. One man who with a word commands the demons and they obey. Maybe the disciples are sitting there and they're like, you guys should have seen what he did on the lake. They were afraid. Then when all the townspeople gather, verse 36, those who had seen it, those who had seen it told them how the one who had been possessed by demons had been healed. The word translated here as healed is the Greek sozo, most often translated as saved. This is no mere healing. This man was delivered from the ravages of evil, and he stands then as a representative of all who have been ravaged by sin and evil, only to be delivered by Jesus. Delivered with the word of his mouth. Jesus entered into the chaos of evil. He entered into the realm of death, so to speak, in the tombs where this man lived, and he brought redemption, healing, and deliverance. So I've been asking myself, and I'll ask you, what would it look like for us to go as Jesus did, into the place and the situation of the oppressed and broken, into the place and situation of the destitute, to go into the heart of death and call people out? Of course, knowing that wouldn't be by our own power, but by the power that lives within us. What would it be like for us as the church, our assembly, the assembly and body of Jesus Christ himself, to go as Jesus did, instead of being held up in our nice, comfortable places of worship, merely speaking about the world around us and its brokenness? What would it be like to meet people where they are and care for them? Jesus had an appointment with this man. He crossed the lake to meet him, and I'm not sure if we're willing to cross the street. I'm not convinced that we as a church, and I'm including myself here, I'm not convinced that we are a church are willing to go into the deepest, darkest places next door to care for people, even as we wax poetic about going overseas and doing missions in other churches. People in darkness need the light, and we have been called to be the light. Now, I suppose if we met someone like this guy, naked, screaming and shouting, I believe most of us would just turn and walk in the completely other direction and make every sort of justification for it that we can imagine. See, we have largely decided to whom we will minister. And it will be safe, never placing ourselves in harm's way, never being vulnerable, forgetting about the power that we say lives in and through us. We talk about being Christ-like and growing into Christ-likeness, but only often in pretty fairy tale Sunday school versions or children's church versions of what that means. Christ reached out to the most vulnerable. Christ became the most vulnerable to save those who were perishing. And I know I'm bound to get people after the sermon who will tell me that this sort of thinking is too radical. God would never want me in harm's way. Just read the Bible. There is no justification for that view. God's people are always in harm's way. We are called to go as Christ went, to minister as Christ did. And if that doesn't frighten you a bit, then maybe you haven't thought about the implications. of what it means to go as Christ did. And if this upsets you, then maybe you've rejected the implications. I've been sitting with this all week. Verse 37, then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, for they were seized with great fear. They saw what happened to the demoniac. They saw him sitting there at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were filled with great fear. And instead of asking, who is this? They respond to the fear with rejection. They saw but could not see. They heard but were deaf to the hearing. Maybe, and even possibly, they were angry about what had happened to their pigs, because the pigs meant more to them than this man. They responded even by rejecting the one who could deliver them as well. Fear will cause us to respond in one of two ways. To long to know the one who is worthy of that fear, or reject him because it would mean surrendering to his authority. And what that might mean for the calling on our lives. So they beg Jesus to leave. The disciples carry on with him, but these people reject him. I wept over the next words more than once this week. So Jesus got into the boat and returned to Galilee. He left. He gave them what they wanted. The poet John Oxenham once wrote of this scene, "Rabbi, be gone. Thy powers bring loss to us and ours. Our ways are not as thine. Thou lovest men, we swine. Oh, get thee hence, omnipotence, and take this fool of thine. His soul, what care we for his soul? What good to us as thou hast made him whole, since we have lost our swine?" And Christ went sadly. He had wrought for them a sign of love and hope and tenderness divine, and they wanted swine. God is a God who calls people unto himself by means of his incredible, remarkable, indelible grace because of his great love. However, he will eventually give people what they want. That's a sobering thought. To be turned over to our own desires and our own affections. As Jesus got in the boat, the man once oppressed by evil and the demonic begged Jesus that he may go with him. And Jesus' answer may seem strange, at least at first glance. Jesus told him no. Nope. Go home. Go home and declare all that God has done for you. So the man went proclaiming through the whole town what Jesus had done for him. Did you catch it? When Jesus tells the man to go back to his home, and I assume he hasn't been there for quite some time, go back home and tell everyone what God has done for you, and he goes proclaiming everything Jesus had done. It's poetic. This is the response that should be ever before our hearts. The great pioneer of shock rock, Alice Cooper, once said, I'll tell you one thing. When Jesus opens your eyes and you finally realize who you are and who he is, it's a whole different world. Fear can bring us to two places. Fear can either compel us to ask with the disciples, who is this? And pressing into knowing him more, or fear can cause us to reject Jesus because of who he is. I said last week that God is not contented with perfunctory or superficial obedience, that we must surrender everything to him. I know some will respond to that fear of surrender to God in rejection because of the fear's implications. To surrender everything we are to God takes remarkable trust. And some of us will reject it. But I'm going to say this. I don't have time to flesh this out. You should come on Wednesdays if you want to talk more about this. We'll be here. I want to say this. This is just so precious. What is so beautifully awe-inspiring is that though one may begin with the fear of God, we don't end there. If fear is the beginning of wisdom, if fear is the beginning of knowledge, then love is its telos. We may begin with fear, but we will complete our relationship with God in Christ through love. This is how relationship grows. When one sees the unfathomable glory of God in Jesus Christ, fear will either blind them, motivating their rejection, or compel them to stand in awe following Jesus. Who is this? How will you respond?